Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful fall day. Ask that you be with us as we go through the week and as we prepare our homes and our hearts and minds for Thanksgiving. Remind us, keep us all mindful of the blessings we have and guide us in the use and care of them as you would have us to do. Be with Dave, our speaker today, as he enlightens us with the history of Westtown, the history that will come alive with him and better our knowledge of the area in which we live, which is also so important. Be with all of those in our families and in our congregation that are in need of your healing touch and grace. Ask that you bless this day. Amen. And without that, no long introduction, Dave Walter will give us a presentation on history of Westtown. So much appreciated, Dave, that you have such a broad knowledge of history, Civil War, Revolutionary War, Westtown, and I think you've talked on a couple other different subjects too, but Dave is a fantastic wealth of knowledge. So with that, without further ado, Dave, the floor is yours.
Kill that bar on the bottom. Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry for the delay. I did a longer version of this just for Westminster, and I put it on a new thumb drive, and for some reason it didn't take. But anyway, here we are. This is my 12th appearance before the fellowship, and I think last time I was here, we went all the way across the continent with Lewis and Clark. Today we're going to stay right here in Westtown Township. The church has been here 31 years. Westtown has been here 339 years. It's the second oldest township in Chester County. Only Birmingham Township is older. Westtown was set up as a township in 1685. You can see here on the map, here's Westtown right here. It's one of the few townships that's a long rectangular township. 8.8 square miles, that's all Westtown is. And it's surrounded, you'll see, by Thornbury, Chester County, Birmingham, East Bradford, West Goshen, East Goshen, and Willistown. So the talk today is really farmland to suburbia. This area is one of the last of the suburban counties to get built up. There you can see a picture of Mapleshade Farm, Marshall Jones's farm on Shiloh Road in 1960. And next to it is a picture I took of Ruston Walk in 2020, probably from almost the same spot where the cows and the stock pond was. This illustrates what's happened to Westtown over the years. Here we have the population growth. 1685, when Penn set up Westtown Township, there were maybe 30 to 50 Lenape Indians wandering through the area. You can see there the very slow growth. What happened in 1910? Well, we're not sure. Maybe the census taker missed some people, but it's probably due to the fact that the cities were growing and farms were becoming more mechanized, and there was less need for farmhands in Westtown, and the younger people were moving into Westchester or Philadelphia or Media for jobs. By 1950, it had rebounded to a little less than 1,000. And in 1954, two things happened. Westchester Pike was made into a 4-lane highway, and the bypass around Westchester on 202 was finished. So you can see there in the next 30 years, development hit Westtown. In 2020, we were up to 11,171 people. Today, there's about 11,500, with more housing development scheduled. So let's go back to the first people, the Lenape. They were really not the first people. The Paleo Indians were. They came across from the Bering Land Bridge around 12,000 BC. There were later waves of Indians that moved into the area. When Penn got here, it was the Lenape. They had either conquered, absorbed, or driven out the original Paleo Indians that were here. And they settled in small camps in eastern Pennsylvania. They spoke an Algonquin language. The Algonquins are basically up in Canada. Between Canada and the Lenape was the Iroquois nation, but they were Algonquins. They lived in established villages that the bands traveled along rivers and streams to hunt and fish. The Great Minquist Pass, which the Indians used to go from the Susquehanna to the Delaware, ran right through Westtown. In fact, it crossed maybe half mile up the road here. There's a sign up by Ram Steiner. Once they crossed from the Brandywine to Chester Creek, Goose Creek, they went on down to the Chester area and to Philadelphia. We know they're here because relics have been found. Right across the street here, there's a pond that's fed by a spring. They found Indian arrowheads at that spring house. So William Penn comes along and he's selling land to wealthy people over in England. And here's the first map of Westtown Township, the home map from 1687. You can see here, here's Westtown. There's approximately 7 landowners in 1687. You've heard of the famous Welsh Tract. Westtown was not part of the Welsh Tract. The Welsh Tract is basically Haverford Township, Radnor Township, Lower Merion, and Tredyffrin. We were on the edge of it, and there were landowners in the Welsh Tract that did buy land in Westtown. So who were some of our early settlers here in Westtown? Well, the first ones we know of are the Benjamin and Ann Buffington Hickman, another name that lives here in Chester County even today, the Hickmans. They initially lived in a cave where 3 of their 7 children were born. That's thought to be in the vicinity of Nectar Lane. You can see on this early map, their cave is actually shown there. Also around 1700, Aaron James began to assemble 688 acres extending from Route 3 to Street Road, this area in here. At the same time, a man named Daniel Hoops acquired some 200 acres in the southeast corner of the township. He was the first justice of the peace in Westtown. And the Huey family arrived around 1730 and started a plantation of 125 acres in the northwest corner. You go up New Street, you can see where their property was. There's the Huey family homestead. I'm sure many of you have passed it driving down South New Street. We found Lenape and early American artifacts have been found by Westchester University archaeology students. I just learned yesterday that they're still cleaning the relics. They're going to be put on display eventually at the Township building. One of the relics is a 4,000-year-old Paleo-Indian arrowhead. So there are Indians living here long, long before the Lenape. Several years ago, Westtown Township bought these ruins. They've been stabilized, and we have a marker on order that'll be placed on General Howell Drive at that corner in the spring. Another early family were the Taylors. They were Welsh Quakers. They came here in 1682, right at the beginning. The son bought 200 acres in Westtown, basically where Pleasant Grove is today, the residential community. They established a half-acre cemetery on their property, and for 135 years, the Taylors and close neighbors were buried there. Philip's son Thomas was a colonel in the Chester County Militia. He was head of the battalion for Westtown and Thornbury. After the Battle of Brandywine in 1777, Hessian troops eluded the homestead down on what's become Street Road. In the 1970s is when their former lands were sold to build today's Pleasant Grove. Unfortunately, the township allowed the house to be torn down and the cemetery was covered over. There's more than 100 bodies buried in a couple of backyards in Pleasant Grove. In 2001, the Taylor family put up a monument on West Tower Course Road to show, a memorial to the burying ground. Here's the oldest home we know of in Westtown. It's not a cave. This won the 2024 Historical Preservation Award. It's the present home of Jim and Francis Lees on Chateau Drive, and it has a date stone of 1718. The original house is this portion here. Like most houses, there's been several wings and additions added to it. We still haven't done a proper deed search on this house to understand who the original owners were. The county hasn't digitized all the deeds yet. Okay, let's look at military activity here in Westtown. Battle of Brandywine, 9/11/1777. Here's an official map done by the U.S. government, and it shows there where the X is, Osborne Hill. This is where the flank movement of the Crown forces stopped and rested at 4 p.m. on 9/11. You can see there on the extreme left of the British Army, the Hessian Jaegers. The Jaegers were an elite reconnaissance force that the British used on their flanks to make sure they weren't going to get attacked from an unknown direction. You can see from the map, the Jaegers crossed Gray Billy Farm right there by New Street. New Street wasn't there then, but it's right here. So this is Gray Billy Farm. We're over here. They crossed on their way to attack the Continental forces at Sandy Hollow battlefield. There's the militia monument for Westtown. It's on South Concord Road. It honors 5 Revolutionary War militiamen that are buried. They were buried in that Taylor cemetery. Colonel Thomas Taylor, his son Thomas Jr., Titus Taylor, John and Henry Fawcett. We put that in last year, I guess. Dave Goodell was there, I remember. We come to the Civil War. Several dozen Westtown men were in the Union Army during the war. The one that was most prominent is Jesse Milson. He was a Quaker, fighting Quaker. He joined the 29th Pennsylvania. He rose to the rank of major by the end of the war, and he was wounded in Tennessee, and he's buried over in West Goshen. 2 of the Bailey boys joined, as did Lewis Pierce of the 97th Pennsylvania. The Pierce farm was right across from where Ruston High School is today. Lewis Pierce joined the 97th Pennsylvania. That was Chester County's 3-year regiment. He went off to war. He never came back to Westtown. He died of a camp fever in South Carolina. After the Battle of Gettysburg, Westtown hosted a paroled prisoner of war camp. And some of you maybe were here when I did that presentation. This was right after the Battle of Gettysburg. Lee couldn't take all the captured Union soldiers back to Virginia, so he paroled 2,000 of them. The government sent them here to a camp at Oakbourne Road and Goose Creek, where the railroad bridge is. The reason we know so much, I'm the world's expert on this camp, by the way. The reason I am is because of Dave Goodale. Dave Goodale's collateral relative, William Goodale, was the camp surgeon. And after we put this marker up, we didn't really know that much about the camp, but I got a marker for us from the state. Dave Goodale came to me and he said, Dr. Goodale's records are all up at Westchester University in a special collection. So I went over and I found all of Dr. Goodale's hospital records for the camp for 7 weeks. Fortuitously, one of the soldiers that was treated was named Walters. So, you know, I'm curious. I knew he wasn't a relative, but in searching his name on the internet, I found the complete camp muster for 1,861 soldiers. So I learned who all the officers were. I learned all the regiments and everything. And that's thanks to Dave Goodale. If he hadn't given me that tip, we still wouldn't know that much about it. One of the prisoners, Corporal Thomas Nolan, settled in Westtown. I know some of you have heard the Westtown love story. If you haven't, I'll repeat it again. Thomas Nolan was born in Ireland about 1832. And sometime in the 1850s, we believe, he emigrated to the United States. When the Civil War broke out, he was in Steubenville, Ohio. So he decided, I'm going to serve my adopted country. He joins the 25th Ohio, a 3-year regiment. Well, they fight all over the East. They're practically wiped out at the Battle of Chancellorsville, but they make it to Gettysburg, and they're way out on the front lines. They get hit on several sides by rebel troops. And Thomas Nolan is one of those 70-some members of his regiment are captured. He's among those 2,000 that are sent here to Westtown to the parole camp. Well, there wasn't much to do in camp. You could play cards, you could sneak out and go into Westchester and get drunk and this sort of thing. But Thomas Nolan wanted to make a few bucks. And the farmers in the area were starting to harvest their crops, the peaches and corn and this sort of thing. They needed men because some of their men were off in the Union Army. So he hires out to the farm of Anthony and Ellen Kirk. And they lived right off Shiloh Road in Westtown. He gets up to the house. He finds that the wife, Ellen Kirk, is a girl he used to date back in Ireland. Hollywood story, right? Not only that, in December of 1863, Mr. Kirk dies suddenly. So the widow, Ellen, writes to Thomas, who's back in the Army in Virginia, and tells him what happened. He decides, I'm not going to re-enlist. So he waits till his enlistment runs out in the summer of 64. He moves back here to Westtown. He marries Ellen. And they live happily ever after till 1885 when he dies. So that's the Westtown love story. Now there were black residents of Westtown, and one of them, Isaac Winters, joined the U.S. colored troops in April of 1864, and he saw action at Petersburg and the Appomattox campaign. He lived along Little Shiloh Road, and he was a laborer and a sexton at Shiloh AME Church for 60 years. At the end of the war, you were allowed to buy your weapons. Very few of the soldiers did. They cost $15 to $20 those days. He bought his weapons. He took them home with him, and they were found a number of years ago in a closet at the Forsyth House, which is on Westtown Road in West Goshen, just outside of our township. They're now in a private collection. I've seen them on display at Gettysburg College. And there's a picture of his musket, his initials and regiment are carved into the stock of the rifle and his bayonet. He died in 1911 and he's buried in Shiloh AME Cemetery along with 14 other Black Civil War veterans. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about some of the significant homes and farms in our area. Maple Shade Farm. In 1912, a man named Edward Twaddell, who owned a lot of land in Thornbury also, was raising horses and mules. Everybody used horses and mules in those days. Somebody had to breed them. This was a breeding farm. In 1913, Marshall Jones moved his family from Upper Darby out here and began raising dairy cows and potatoes. And we know during World War II, German prisoners of war were brought out every day from Fort Mifflin, and they worked digging potatoes and doing other chores on the farm. Mrs. Jones fed them a very nice noonday meal, much better than what they got back at Fort Mifflin in the prison. And for years after, a number of the prisoners would write from Germany and correspond with the Jones family. 2003, the school district seized the farm under eminent domain and built their Wesston High School, which opened in 2006. And the school district decided there was too much land they didn't need. They sold it off to develop those Ruston Walk houses we saw at the beginning. This is the Winter family, the Winter farm. It's off of Street Road as you go to the east end of the township. It's one of the last working farms in Westtown. They still have sheep and what else do they have? Sheep and hay is still grown there. And part of the barn is used for production of malt to make whiskeys. Here's the McDaniel farm, which is at 352 in Westchester Pike today. That's now where St. Simon and Jude is. The house you see there is actually the rectory for St. Simon and Jude. Along the top here, that's where the James Pottery was, and many of those houses are still there, including you see down here the old spring house. The ruins of that are still there. But this is the way a lot of this area looked up until the 1970s. The George Fawcett Farm. It's located up here about where the electronic billboard is. The Fawcett's had purchased this land before the Revolution on the Wilmington Road, which is now 202. Two of their sons, John and Henry, honored at that monument, were in the Chester County Militia. A grandson married a Yearsley neighbor and expanded the farm, and there was a general store and Fawcett's Creamery were established. The large house was eventually isolated by Route 202 improvements, and many of you have driven 202 in the last few years remember it there. It was like right on the other side of the guardrail. It was torn down about 7-8 years ago, I guess, when there's a new housing development there. Stetson Middle School and Starkweather are located on the old farm. And there's a few other structures up here that it's been talked about demolishing them with various businesses wanting to move in, but there's nothing official. The Bailey Niven House and Farm, that's still there. It was built in 1855 by Abram and Mary Bailey. They named it Fairview, and there were 300 acres that had been part of that original Hoops family holding. Two of their sons served in the Union Army. Here's another story. You're in Westtown. This may have been Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. Before the Civil War, well, during the Civil War, the founders of Swarthmore College were looking for land for the college. And they knew about Westtown School, obviously, a Quaker institution. So they looked at the Bailey acreage at the corner of 352 and Street Road. They came within $20 of agreeing on the price for the land. Bailey said no. So they went looking around. They found land in a town called Westdale, named after Benjamin West. And they bought the land there. They built Swarthmore College, and Westdale changed their name to Swarthmore. So Westtown could have been Swarthmore, but it is not. In 1881, he did sell the land to Wilkin Niven, who operated as a dairy farm. And it's passed through several owners since then. The Gooches currently own it and conserve the property, and they won the 2018 Westtown Award. I believe there's still 5 or 6 structures that have been turned into houses that still exist on the Bailey Niven farm. You can see that as you drive down Chester Road just before you get to the intersection of Street Road. Krabilly Farm. I think we all know that. We're sitting on part of it. Let me give you a little history, and then I'll update you. I think Dave last week asked about an update. The land was sold to Richard Collett, who never came to the colony. In 1696, the land was managed by a man named John Radley, and that's where Radley Run gets its name. In 1777, Thomas Taylor and his family operated this property. As I said, the Battle of Brandywine saw elements of Crown forces under Howe and Cornwallis advance across the western edge of Krabilly. In 1883, it was in the hands of David and John McClure, later a Sarah Geiger. But in 1935, it was purchased by James K. Robinson Sr. And he named it Krabilly Farm because he had been born in County Antrim, Ireland in the 1870s. And he came to America in the 1890s to help his brother Samuel with his grocery business. Their grocery business became Acme Markets. And James was wealthy enough that he went back to Ireland and he bought a place called Krabilly House in 1918. I guess probably to show that he had made it in America and he was going to buy this nice house. 4 years later, the Irish Republican Army burnt the house to the ground during whatever troubles there were in the 1920s. English landlord, that sort of thing. So when he bought the property here in Westtown, he named it Krabilly Farm in honor of the house he had back in Ireland. Anyway, he was vice president and general manager of Acme Markets. His son James was also president of the Devon Horse Show, and he owned an historic collection of more than 100 carriages and coaches. And he was noted for his philanthropy. For example, he donated the land that Westminster Presbyterian Church is on. He died in 2001. There's been a number of development proposals that have failed. I was on the planning commission when Presby Homes was trying to build a retirement community on this property. Westtown Township in December 9th is the closing date, will acquire the 200 acres for a passive recreational park. The money's been raised over $20 million. They said it's going to close on December 9th. It's going to be several years before you'll be able to use it. And you're not going to get the same vista you do today because all the grants that came through, there's various restrictions on what can be done. Number one, it can't be used as a farm any longer. You won't see corn planted there. Number two, 75% of the 200 acres has to be reforested. So eventually you're going to have a forest, not this open farm view you have today. The other 25% will stay open as meadows with passive recreational trails. And the 100 acres at the far end of Craybilly have been divided into 5 20-acre parcels. It'll be like gentleman farms kind of thing, where they'll be able to put up nice couple $1 million houses and that sort of thing. So that's the status of Craybilly. This is the Oakbourne Mansion, home of James and Heloise Smith. I'm sure many of you have seen this multi-millionaire summer country home. It's gone through several reiterations. It started out as John Holm, a Philadelphia industrialist, created Belmont in 1857. He built a 2.5-story granite Italian farmhouse. In 1882, it was acquired by a Philadelphia lawyer and shipping heir named James Smith and his wealthy wife, Heloise Drexel Smith. Drexel. She was the sister of Anthony J. Drexel, who with J. Cook financed the American Civil War, and her niece became the first American-born Roman Catholic saint, St. Catherine Drexel. So the Smiths changed the name to Oakbourne because of the number of oak trees that were there, and they hired T. Roney Williamson, who was a young Westchester architect, to enlarge and renovate the house. And the result is that picture I showed you there. They added a guest house, stables, a water tower, a lake, and a 27-acre park. When they died, James in 1893 and Heloise in 1895, their estates were valued at about $400 million in today's money. Probably, undoubtedly, the richest people who ever lived in this area. Some of us, I guess, are getting close, but 400 million was, most of that money was willed to charities. Heloise supported a lot of the colleges that St. Catherine Drexel founded. The house itself was given to the Philadelphia Episcopal Diocese. It became the James C. Smith Memorial Home for sick and convalescing white women. There's a plaque right there in the entrance that says that. That held until Stephen Girard's will was overturned in the 60s, and you couldn't restrict it anymore.
Dave, I just wanted to quickly say that my Rotary Club, the Westtown and Goshen Rotary Club, had 2 Westtown supervisors as members when it was formed in 1975. And the first project they did was to restore the water tower at Oakbourne Mansion.
Yeah, and one thing about the convalescent home that you might be interested in, the visiting physician was Dr. Robert Poole, who was a member of this congregation and was instrumental in getting Robinson to donate this property. He was the visiting physician at the home. You're right. The township required the property through a series of grants, and in 1974 they were thinking about tearing it down, and one of the planning commissioners put his foot down and managed to persuade them to save it. It's now a venue for weddings, and the park is being expanded, multi-million-dollar renovation of sports complexes and used for festivals and that sort of thing. There's a picture of the pond, which is still there, but the pumping station is not. The iconic water tower was built by the Smiths. That's the emblem of Westtown Township today. And all the way at the top there, there's a little observatory. I've never been up there, but I understand in the winter, because it's on the highest point in Westtown, you can actually see Center City, Philadelphia. Let's look at some of the businesses and institutions. Darlington's Corner, we're right on the edge of it. It was around the intersection of Street Road and Wilmington Road. It's the only real village that Westtown's ever had. On maps, it extends up as far as Pleasant Grove Road. So like I said, we're just on the edge of it. The building on the corner started out as a log cabin tavern in 1803, and by 1823, the serpentine structure you see there was opened as an inn, and it operated into the 1800s until converted to a residence in the 20th century. They did sell liquor there until Westtown went dry. It was a drover's inn. The drovers used to bring sheep down called Great Marlborough Street, which became Street Road. And eventually it was extended all the way to Westchester Pike. Or they bring cattle, and there'd be other commerce coming from Westchester to Wilmington. So this was a great place after a couple hours of standing behind sheep and cows and all the dust. You would stop there and you would have a refreshment. So it did quite well. Obviously, other things sprang up around this tavern. At one point, it was called the Sign of the King of Prussia Tavern. So we might have been King of Prussia. So there are various businesses operated there from the 1920s. There was a clockmaking shop. There was a cotton factory. There was Britton's General Store, where the Delta gas station is today, and on the Thornbury corner was a blacksmith shop. There's a picture there of a blacksmith that worked with several of the neighbors looking in the window. The dentist building there on the corner, that was part of it. And the village contained a number of residences owned by families named McClure, Darlington, Taylor, Coburn, names that still associated with it. There's well, I wanted to say there was a famous person who lived right here on this property named Henry Whale. Henry Whale was in the early 1800s up until the Civil War, was the most famous dancer and dance choreographer in the whole United States. He ran dance academies. He was the Arthur Murray of the day. Before the Civil War, he had moved to Westchester, and something happened. He got depressed or something, and he bought a house right here on this property. And he lived here for 25 years until the neighbor boys found him dead in his bedroom one morning. But he was the Arthur Murray of the time. He was known up and down the East Coast. He appeared in plays, he choreographed shows and this sort of thing. This is the Darlington Westtown Inn on the corner. There's a picture from 1930 when it still had a porch and it still had a view. Today, as you know, it's so grown up around there, you can't really see what's happening there. The township, when they acquired or acquiring Gray Billy, carved out 2 acres at that corner where the house is. And it's not subject to all those grants. So the township can do whatever it wants with this property. Um, We had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the township supervisors don't know what they want to do with it. The most likely thing they'll do is they'll sell it. And we hope it can be repurposed as a restaurant, as a business office or something. But there is a possibility it'll be torn down. And that's something Historical Commission will fight. And if it comes to it, maybe some of you will come to meetings and express your views on it. But that is the most historic thing left in Darlington's Corner. On the other corner where we have today the Amish Market, which was preceded by an Acme, there was Bartram's Market on the corner. And that lasted until I think the 1980s. When we moved here in 91, the Acme and that shopping center was brand new. The Westtown Pottery, this was one of the James's son, also named Aaron. He bought 126 acres in the northeast portion of Westtown, which is where 352 and Green Lane is today. That Green Lane used to be called Pot House Road. He made this utilitarian red earthenware. He was successful. He was worth about $750,000 in today's money when he died in 1823. And that pottery operated until the 1860s. You can see his creations in the Philadelphia Art Museum, and there's a very nice one up at the Chester County History Center Museum. Britton's Quarry. Just, where Brent Selleck's house is, it's right behind there on the other side of Radley Run. Serpentine rock was laid down 600 million years ago, and it's only found in 4 states, including the corner here in Westtown. There's a mineral called olivine, which gives the rock its color. More than 500,000 cubic yards of rock have been removed from the Westtown Quarry between 1730 and 1888. It was operated by the Britton family, and in 1888, a mysterious fire destroyed the quarry machinery and it began to fill with water. Since 1902, it's been operated by a private swim club named the Quarry Swimming Association. If you could get in there, that's what you would see in the quarry. Here's a house built with that serpentine stone. It's called Painter's Hill. It was built by a man named Coburn. Westminster Presbyterian owned that house. And Westminster Presbyterian are the ones who demolished that house. It was right here as you start up the hill on Old Wilmington Pike. Thankfully, Ed McFalls permitted me and several others to go through the house before it was demolished. We took pictures of the interior. There was nice fireplaces, spiral staircase, and whatever. We don't know all the details of how Westminster came to own that. It was something to do with swapping land and making the Robinsons happy. But in any case, that house was a very nice example of serpentine stone house that no longer exists. The Pennsylvania Epileptic Hospital and Colony was right next door to the Smith Hospital there. In fact, most of the land came from the Smith estate. It cared for men, women, and children afflicted with epilepsy. Apparently in those days, treatment for epilepsy was to just get you out in the country and you wouldn't be at your house. As treatments improved in the 1940s, most of the epileptics were allowed to live at home, and the last patients left here in 1958. That particular building is torn down. It became a hospital for mentally ill children until 1965. And then for 2 years, it was the facilities for John Knox Junior College, which was a biblically oriented junior college. That only lasted a couple of years. And now Gaudenzia, a treatment center for addicted people, has operated there since 1969. Any buildings that are there now were not really part of the original hospital. Houses of worship. There's the oldest one we know of, Shiloh AME Church. 1807 is when the Methodists bought it and built it. 1817, they sold it to the African Methodist Episcopal denomination. This was a center of a thriving Black community in Westtown and East West Goshen for 100 years. In the 1960s, it had been abandoned and was demolished. I'm not going to tell you any more of this story because in February for Black History Month, the chairman of the committee that's trying to bring the history of Shiloh back to public knowledge will be speaking to us. So I'll let him do that in February. The other churches we have are Westtown Friends, which is on the campus of Westtown School. That was built only in the 1920s. You have Advent Lutheran at the corner of Green Lane and Chester Road. You have the two Catholic churches, St. Max across the street and St. Simon and Jude on Route 3. There you have Westminster Presbyterian, 1993. Nice winter scene. I think Lynn George took that picture. And then on New Street, some of you might have seen the sign for Church of the Loving Shepherd. It's in a converted barn, and they have a really good summer camp there for disadvantaged and mentally challenged kids in the summer called Born Leaf. Let's look at education briefly. There's Westtown School, founded in 1799 when they bought 600 acres from James Gibbons. That acreage still runs all the way across Westtown, north to south. And they have no plans to turn the excess acreage into housing or anything. It was a co-educational boarding school right from the start. Very, very unusual. The Quakers believed in education for women. Over the years, about 30,000 students have attended the school. It's the oldest continuously functioning co-ed boarding school in America. Non-Quakers only began attending there in 1933. It was sort of self-contained. Over the years, it operated a grist and sawmill. It had a dairy. They made their own bricks to build their buildings. They had farming to provide food for the students. In fact, even today, there's still Farmer John there for that Pete and Penny. It's been visited by two presidents. Former President Dwight Eisenhower visited his two grandkids that went there, granddaughters, and President and Mrs. Hoover had a granddaughter who attended Westtown. Another famous graduate was, what's her name, Taylor. Well, have you seen the comedy 2.5 Men? Mm-hmm. The woman who plays the mother of the two guys, she went to Westtown School. Can't remember her name. So he said it was more than a school. There's a picture here of the mill and the house. This house is still there. If you go up Westtown Road, there's a bend, and that house is still there. It's been renovated. This has been torn down since the 1970s. At one point, the township owned that, and they had community dances and things there. The other picture shows the back of the sawmill and where the mill race emptied into to Goose Creek. Here's two of the early Westtown public schools. The first is the Mercer School, 1807. That's now the gatehouse to the Oakbourne Mansion. Next to is a picture of Union Independent School. That's at the corner of 352 and Street Road. For many years, that was a photography studio. And I think there's some plastic surgeons or there's some sort of a medical office in there today. Here's two more early Westtown schools. This was before they formed Westchester Area School District. The thing I want you to note there is both those schools were integrated. Westchester School District itself was not integrated until the 1960s. But you can see there, the Center School in 1913, that building is still there. It's a private residence. Pleasant Grove School in 1904. You can see there's some Black children there. That was torn down a few years ago to make room for the Township maintenance office they're building. There's Bayard Ruston High School and the Ruston Walk Homes, the site of the old Maple Shade Farm. Finish with transportation. That's the way of Wilmington Pike looked in quieter times. It was started out as an Indian trail, became a wagon road to take grain and other products down to the port in Wilmington. It was a planked macadamized turnpike from 1854 to 1898. It became US Highway 202, and now it's 4 lanes of heavy traffic. We have not been able to identify where in the township that was taken. Presumably those houses are now torn down. The railroad. There's Westtown Station, which is in Thornbury Township, but we're going to call it Westtown. There's a photo from around 1900 of an excursion train, people that were coming out to Westtown School. Still looks pretty much like that today. It's an art studio. You go by there, you can see the ceramics and the iron sculptures and everything that the artist sells. There actually was a station in Westtown, the Oakbourne Station. The railroad came through here on its way from Media in 1858. And the station was in Westtown was been called Lecompton, Hemp Hills, Belmont, and finally after the Smiths bought and named Oakbourne, they named the station Oakbourne. It was electrified by the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1928. This station was built in 1880, was closed in 1961 because traffic had dwindled to the point of nobody wanted to get on there. It was demolished shortly thereafter. And railroad service to Westchester was ended by SEPTA in 1986. If you want to know where this is, you know where Oakbourne Road goes under the railroad. It's 1 lane. It was right there. You can still in the wintertime see where the driveway went back. There's another photo of the station with Ellen Speakman, who was the postmistress from 1883 till 1928 until the Westtown Post Office moved. And you can see a steam engine there. So that was before electrification. And the whole family lived on the 2nd floor. 1997, Westchester Railroad started excursion service. And there's a picture of the excursion train crossing Goose Creek in the township, Oakbourne Park. So 1 or 2 years ago, we had fellowship had an excursion, and I did a much broader commentary of the history of the railroad and some of the sites you can see along the way. There may have been another railroad built. 1873, state chartered a railroad called the Chester Creek and Brandywine Railroad. And it would have left this railroad right at Westtown Station, would have followed Taylor's Run up through what's now Pleasant Grove, would have crossed 202, probably at the back end of the church parking lot, run up to Britton's Quarry, and then on down to Brandywine to connect with the Wilmington and Northern Railroad at Pocopson. 1873, there was a big panic in the United States. The money fell through. It was never built. But if you drive on Westbourne Road, just before you get to Street Road, if you look on the left, you can see the remains of the embankment that had been started, and it ends in somebody's backyard. So we could have had railroad tracks right through the back end of the church here. We also had trolley line in Westtown. It was operated along Westchester Pike. It was operated by the Philadelphia and Westchester Traction Company from 1898 till 1954. In 1954, they doubled the size of Westchester Pike, and they didn't want to run the trolley down the middle of the pike, so they abandoned it. This is a photo taken in 1948 near Manley Road, where Marketplace Square and the Tesla dealer is. And we would have had another trolley line. They proposed running a trolley line from Westchester right down 202 to Wilmington. And that was never built either. The trolley line to Wilmington went out through Kennett Square. So the church could have had a trolley line in front and a railroad in the back, but never happened. And we had an airport, or at least we picked up the airmail in 1935, right up here where Starkweather School is. They used to string a mail bag between two poles, and a plane would swoop down with a hook and grab the mail bag.
Dave,
And that is it.
I was just gonna make a comment on that. They still use that same method for picking up signs. That where they have a hook like that that comes down and would pick up signs. You've seen these signs fly through the air. That's how they pick them up.
So that's a brief history of Westtown. There's a dozen more stories, but any questions, Ann?
I live in Westchester. Our back,
Wait a minute, there's two of you talking. Ann, I called Ann.
I thought you put,
Now, Ann.
When we first moved here in '93, on 202, there was a diner. Does anybody remember that little diner?
Birmingham Diner, Benadryl is corner.
Back in California now.
Was it on 202 right along here?
It was in Birmingham
Can't hear
Township, Birmingham Grill.
Yes, it's in,
Okay, wasn't it taken up and somebody bought it?
Yeah, it was down where the Infinity dealer is, and it was jacked up and taken to Truckee, California, and it's still in operation.
Yeah, we used to go there when we first
Yeah.
moved here.
Now,
The restaurant next to Barker's Market for a while,
was there?
Sir, I live in West Goshen Township, and our backyard, there's a ditch back there. They said the railroad ran back there. It's about 20 feet deep, 30 feet wide. There's no fence or anything, but there's no tracks or anything like that. Could that have been where they started building?
West Goshen?
Yes.
Where exactly?
Green Hill Road and Ashbury
Oh,
Road.
yes, that's the railroad that was built in 1832, connected Westchester with what's now Malvern. And that was abandoned in the 1960s, I believe. That's the way they brought the freight in. The freight did not come out from Philly through Media. The freight came out the main line and then down into Westchester. That's what that ditch is. There's still 4 stations left, been turned into houses, except for one at, there's one along, not Paoli Pike, Phoenix Gulf. That's what that is. It's not one of these railroads.
We heard earlier that the Serpentine House at 926 and 202 is being moved. Do you know where it's being moved to?
The inn?
Yeah.
No, it's not being moved. PennDOT is putting in a turn lane, taking more of the land, and they're claiming that it's not going to structurally damage the house, so PennDOT is not going to pay to move it. And I really doubt that the township is going to have the money to move it themselves. Like I said, its outcome is undetermined, but they're in a position to be able to sell that corner now. And the buyer could do whatever, hopefully there'll be some conditions put on the sale that it'll survive. We'd love to turn it into a history center, but who knows? Any other?
Here's some minor history for you. My family moved here in 1953, and my father managed a farm at Oakmore Hospital. And at that time, it was still an epileptic hospital. And I remember a couple of the men came down from the hospital and worked with us on the farm.
Yeah, most of the farm was also part of Pleasant Grove. The creamery building is still there. You drive along Pleasant Grove Road, you see the basketball courts on the one side of the road. On the other side is the old creamery building.
And that house, we lived in that house that's there, and it had I guess you would call it a cornerstone up there, the big, it said 1791.
Well, we're doing an oral history project, so if you've been around that long, we'd love to interview you. Last we interviewed Jim Lees, and Jim built half the homes here in Westtown. He was a real source of information. So I'd like to talk to you about getting on record. No lies, just.
As I understand it, the conservation organization, Natural Lands, is very active in the preservation of Craig Village Farm.
Yeah, they raised a lot of the money and helped with the grants and that sort of thing. But like I said, 75% of it is going to be turned back into a forest. So if you like that view of the farmlands, it will not be there in 10 or 15 years. Anything else?
Just real quickly, talking about the integration of the Westchester school system. My uncle, Elwood Spellman, whose this room is named after, also his name is on the Westchester Area School District building. And that's because in the 50s and 60s, he was president of the school board, and he was the one that pushed for the area to be redistricted so that all of the Black kids who all lived in Westchester was divided into a pie to allow these kids to be sent to different schools around the district. And yeah, that did occur in the early 60s.
Yeah. I think that the Borough Hall used to be the school where the Black kids went because most of them lived there. But there were some that lived at the other end of the borough near St. Agnes.
Yeah.
It had to go all the way up to that school till the early 60s. So we weren't quite as enlightened in the north as we sometimes think. And on that note, I think I'm scheduled in February to come back and talk about Frederick Douglass. So that, God willing, I'll be here.
Thank you, Dave.
That was enlightening, as all of your talks are, Dave. It's just wonderful that you take the time to put that together and enlighten us with the knowledge that you have of history. And it's good to know the area that we live in, some of the background to it for, especially for those of us who are relatively new to the area and are not lifelong residents of the area. This is totally new information. So remember, next week, Ann Hatfield, along with Kirsten, will talk to us on Thanksgiving, the bounteous love of that, and some of the history and things around the how Thanksgiving came about and what it's all there for. So I bid you adieu and have a good week. See you next Tuesday.